Before we begin, a few words. My mother works in an office in science childhood. I have heard about all of these setups, intrigues, sign here and leave. This is not just content for the sake of hype. It's life experience collected into a story, so that you may learn about yourself and don't not repeat mistakes of others. All named companies and addresses are fictional and have been changed, but the feelings are real. Let's get started.
He smirked like he'd already won. Like the whole game had been played, and I'd just now shown up to collect my participation trophy. He was the kind of man who'd never built anything in his life, just wandered into a kingdom someone else carved out of bedrock and started redecorating. And now he was sitting in my chair, in my building, sipping cold brew from a branded tumbler with my architecture humming beneath his loafers. "Let's not drag this out," Arthur said, voice syrupy with faux sympathy. "You've been great. A real legacy asset, but this company's moving forward, and unfortunately, well, you're not part of that vision anymore." It took every ounce of composure not to laugh or cry. I didn't do either. I just looked at the coffee ring his cup was leaving on the only mahogany table I'd ever splurged on in my entire goddamn life and thought, he doesn't even know what he's stepping on. Hey, quick note before we go deeper. If this kind of story pulls you in, tap subscribe and hit the like button. 97% of people never do, and honestly, it helps more than you'd think. Keeps this kind of truth coming to light. Anyway, back to Arthur's smirk. He wasn't wrong, technically. No one at Luxor knew the full extent of what I was. Publicly, I was Director of Infrastructure, a boring title for a boring job that involved back-end support, compliance audits, data tunnels, and the kind of critical maintenance nobody sees unless it fails. But 15 years ago, I built the first security spine of Luxor Systems out of nothing but sleepless nights and code stitched together between eviction notices. And I never let go. When the seed round came, I moved quiet. Registered Key Point Holdings in Delaware, layered it behind a private trust. Made sure when the real equity dance started, the spotlight never hit me. I let the brand get flashy, let the board dilute itself with venture funds and golfing uncles. Let them rename products, fire C-suite staff like they were trimming hedges, and push launch dates they didn't understand. But me? I tracked everything. Every cap table update, every voting clause, every sneaky convertible note, every late-night equity dump. I had 91% ownership sitting in a trust structure not even the general counsel could untangle without a subpoena and a full pot of black coffee. And the only clause that mattered? Section 7.3a. Any attempt to remove a stakeholder with more than 20% equity required unanimous board approval, excluding the subject. Arthur hadn't read it. Or worse, he thought Director of Infrastructure was a line item on a payroll spreadsheet he could delete like a failed pilot program. I never took vacations, never spoke at conferences. I let them forget me, let them think the firewalls held themselves up, that the certifications auto-renewed like Netflix subscriptions. And now, here was Arthur, CEO's golden boy nephew, flown in from some failed digital consulting firm in LA, trying to slap a new coat of paint on a system he couldn't even log into without texting me for the recovery code. He'd renamed half the department's pods, introduced a Slack bot that posted inspirational quotes from Steve Jobs like real artist ship, which was hilarious considering Arthur hadn't shipped a damn thing but blame since he got here. But I didn't argue. I didn't point to the data logs he broke. Didn't correct him when he announced our migration to a platform we'd already quietly deprecated last quarter. Didn't flinch when he called me an elegant relic. I just watched and waited, because some of us don't need revenge speeches. Some of us already own the warpath. It started with a color palette. Arthur strolled into a Monday strategy call wearing a mock turtleneck and sneakers that cost more than my first car, holding a laminated mood board like he'd just redesigned the Louvre. "We're shedding dead skin," he declared. New logo, new lingo, new blood. By dead skin, he meant the legacy systems, the stability, the infrastructure, me. He renamed the security operations room to The Vault, rebranded HR as People Fuel, changed engineering to Launch Ops, which sounded like a fireworks company run by frat bros. The consultants he brought in, two 20-somethings in Patagonia vests who used synergy as a verb, nodded like bobbleheads at every word he said. And then he turned to me on Zoom and said, "Let's update your title. Director of Legacy Architecture. Has a nice ring to it, doesn't it?" I smiled, because I knew what legacy meant to men like Arthur. It meant old, outdated, replaceable. Something you take a picture of before gutting the foundation. He didn't see the flicker in my eyes, didn't realize he was sawing through the branch he was perched on. He was too busy adding filters to the corporate Instagram. The next day, I noticed my access credentials had changed, not revoked. That would have triggered an alert to our compliance team. Just quietly shifted. Permissions altered. Systems I'd built, core frameworks, remote vault triggers, IP trace paths, started showing me 403 errors. I called Brandon from DevOps. Did someone change the back-end roles? He sounded nervous. Arthur said to streamline admin layers, something about zero trust environments. I figured you were in the loop. I wasn't. And that was the moment the shift became a threat. Arthur hadn't just overstepped. He'd stepped into the kill zone with no armor, because the systems he was touching, I hadn't just designed them. I'd buried safeguards in the architecture, Easter eggs for auditors, ownership breadcrumbs no junior analyst could interpret without a damn map. And then it clicked. They were moving to fire me. Quietly. No public spectacle. Just fade me out. Reassign my duties. Lock me out of my own work. I opened the encrypted drive I hadn't touched in 4 years. Pulled up the Luxor Systems shareholder agreement, scrolled to section 7.3a. There it was, in plain black text. Any structural dismissal of a vested partner with 20% equity requires unanimous board consent, excluding the subject. I had 91%. They never read the full version. Hell, they never even requested an updated cap table from Keypoint Holdings. And that, right there, was their fatal mistake. They assumed I was small. They assumed silence meant surrender. They assumed wrong. Arthur thought he was launching some grand renaissance, a rebirth. He didn't know he was chiseling his own epitaph, and I wasn't going to stop him. Not yet. He had the nerve to call it a courtesy meeting. Just you, me, and HR, he said over Slack the night before, like we were catching up for drinks, not preparing for a professional mugging. I didn't answer. Didn't need to. I'd already backed up my access logs, mirrored the permissions changes, and stored a clean copy of the version shareholder doc in 4 separate locations, including one printed and sealed envelope in a deposit box Arthur didn't even know existed. Still, I showed up at 9:02, sharp enough to keep appearances, late enough to make a point. The HR rep, a woman named Leslie I'd onboarded 5 years ago, was already seated, stiff and silent like she was waiting for a sermon to end. Arthur sat at the head of the small glass table like a budget Bond villain, gesturing at the coffee across from him like I was supposed to be grateful. "Let's skip the drama," he said. "We're restructuring. Your role doesn't fit the direction anymore." He actually said it like that. Your role doesn't fit the direction anymore. Like I was a sock with a hole in it. Like I hadn't built the damn infrastructure that carried his entire tech stack. Like I was a line item that wandered off the page. He pulled out a folder and slid it across the table with 2 fingers. The way you'd push away a dirty napkin. "Sign it. Take the package. Walk out clean." I glanced down. The letter was predated, pre-signed by someone in legal I hadn't even met. Severance terms, equipment return clauses, final paycheck dispersal, it was all there. What wasn't there? Board approval, or any mention of Section 7.3a. But Arthur wouldn't have noticed that. He was too busy watching my face like it was a performance. I looked up, gave him one slow nod, and signed. No hesitation, no questions. Just one stroke of ink and a blank expression. He leaned back in the chair, smug enough to float. Leslie shifted awkwardly, clearly confused why I wasn't crying, or at least arguing. Arthur smiled like he'd just checkmated a blindfolded child. "Thank you for your years of service," he said, rehearsed as hell. "You've been an important piece of Luxor's story." I smiled back, happy to contribute. And just as I stood, I reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone, snapped a photo of the document, angled just enough to catch Arthur's Rolex in the corner, second hand ticking at 10:41 a.m. He didn't even notice. But I did, because I knew what that moment would become later. A timestamp, a trigger, evidence that the firing had been executed without full board review, without required counsel, without even reading the contract they claimed to follow. Arthur thought he'd just neutered a department. What he'd actually done was sign his resignation. He just didn't know it yet. I walked out of the room calm, coat over my arm, phone in my hand, not a single backward glance. The whole building felt lighter, because the dead weight wasn't me, it was him. The moment I stepped outside that glass conference room, I didn't go home. I didn't even head back to my desk. I walked straight to the parking structure, sat in the car with the doors still open, and dialed one number from the burner phone I kept in the glove box. The one nobody knew about except me and one other person. Kendra Nguyen, she answered, clipped as ever. No hello, no small talk. Just business. It's time, I said. My voice sounded like someone else's, quiet, calm, but laced with the kind of steel that only forges under pressure. There was a pause on the other end, long enough to hear her blink. You want me to trigger the reclassification? Yes, effective immediately. You understand what this sets off? I built the fuse, I replied. Light it. She didn't say another word, just hung up. That's how it began. At 4:42 p.m., a certified digital letter was sent to Luxor Systems' legal inbox. Kendra, ever the professional, also had a hard copy delivered by courier. Signature required. No room for claims of oversight or spam filters. The subject line was surgical. Notice of Majority Interest Holder Enactment, Section 7.3a. The language inside was colder than marble. It referenced my majority position via Keypoint Holdings, cited the procedural breach regarding my termination, and outlined the automatic freeze on any further board actions enacted without proper vote protocol. It wasn't a protest letter. It was a legal scalpel. Arthur's move had just been declared invalid. Worse, his current appointment now required full board reconfirmation. And under the bylaws, guess who had the controlling vote? I didn't storm in, didn't shout. I simply inserted a lever into the structure they thought they owned and turned it with a flick of my wrist. And just like that, the weight shifted. It must have hit the legal team like a sledgehammer dipped in ice. I imagine the general counsel staring at the filing, rereading it 3 times, then realizing the name behind the LLC in the footnotes. They had no idea K-Point still held anything. They assumed I cashed out after Series B, like everyone else. That's what Arthur's uncle, our brilliant CEO, had told the board anyway, that I was a nice tech story, a historical footnote. What they never saw was the chain of proxies, the blind trusts. The limited partnerships woven through shell layers in 3 jurisdictions. They thought I was an employee. I was a sovereign entity. Within 45 minutes of the filing, I got a text from an unlisted number. We need to talk. ASAP. I didn't respond. Not yet. This wasn't panic time, it was pressure time. I wanted Arthur to feel it slowly, like water rising in a locked room. Not a crash, not a blow, but the growing discomfort of realizing you've trapped yourself. And I hadn't even started twisting the knife. By Thursday morning, the panic was officially institutional. Legal pulled in all hands. Outside counsel was looped in. Auditors got pings at dawn. A thread on the private board Slack channel started racking up messages like a slot machine. The subject? Keypoint. Urgent ownership clarification. It took them less than 2 hours to realize they'd screwed up. Keypoint Holdings wasn't just some passive investment fund like they'd assumed. It wasn't owned by a random third-party trust or a silent investor from Vancouver or Zurich. It was me. And that quiet proxy chain? It ran cold until they hit the escrow file. Then it got hot. Fast. Because behind that proxy sat my trust. And inside that trust was the original Luxor Systems IP deed, dated, notarized, and still legally binding. Every module, every algorithm, every compliance bridge Arthur had been trying to rebrand as innovation had my name watermarked at the root level. The 91% equity stake had never moved, not once. The documents had all been updated annually, scrubbed, and recertified through my family's legal counsel. Not a single share had passed hands without my signature, but no one thought to look. Because Arthur's father, the brilliant, camera-ready CEO, had assumed I'd sold out after Series B, I let him believe it. Even sent him a Christmas card that year with a "thanks for the wild ride" postscript and a bottle of scotch I knew he was allergic to. The problem wasn't their ignorance. It was their confidence in it. When the documents landed in their inbox, there was a moment of complete digital paralysis. Nobody dared say it out loud, but every executive in that thread knew what had happened. They didn't fire a director. They attempted to push out a founder, and now that founder was calling a vote. One of my old colleagues, still loyal, forwarded me a screen grab from the internal legal chat. No names, but the messages were time-stamped and frantic. Why didn't we flag the ownership structure? Was this reviewed during the last audit? He just signed the termination letter. Why is he calling a board vote? Because the vote wasn't about me. It was about Arthur, about the breach of protocol, about the careless governance, about putting the company's future in the hands of a man who didn't know how to read a cap table, let alone a contract. They were scrambling, grasping at straws, talking about whether they could offer me a consulting transition, float some hush equity, maybe give me an honorary emeritus title. I didn't respond. I just monitored the emails silently as my proxies lit up in the database, one by one confirming board-level access. They were trying to walk it back. But you can't walk back a paper trail. You can't unsend a certified filing. You can't delete history. And Arthur? He was still showing up to work like nothing had changed, still walking the halls, still hosting his little all-hands meetings and spouting off about disruption, still smirking. But not for long. The room smelled like leather and panic. Luxor's boardroom had always been more theater than war room. Dark walnut table, 12 ergonomic chairs nobody ever adjusted, and a projection screen that hadn't seen an actual presentation since pre-pandemic. The walls were lined with blown-up marketing slogans. Secure the future, built on trust. Irony, meet your canvas. The others were dialed in. 10 little avatars blinking on the main screen, corporate smiles frozen mid-expression. Arthur was the only one who wasn't on time. I sat at the head, not where I usually sat, but I figured if I was going to reclaim my company, I might as well do it from the damn throne. At 10:07, the boardroom door swung open. Arthur stepped in with that smug spring in his step, expecting some kind of apology tour, maybe a wrist slap or a let's just move on discussion with light HR seasoning. Then he saw me. His body jerked like he'd walked in on a funeral and realized his name was on the headstone. For a moment, he froze. Like maybe if he didn't move, I'd vanish. I didn't. I waited until he sat, directly across from me, fidgeting with his sleeve like a kid about to be grounded. Then I pulled out the signed termination letter and laid it flat on the table. Invalid document, I said, holding it between two fingers like something I'd scraped off my boot. Fired without proper board consent. As such, I remained director of infrastructure. He opened his mouth. I cut him off with a click of my trackpad. The projector screen flared to life. One slide. Black text. Centered. Motion to revoke COO appointment. Breach of fiduciary protocol. Arthur squinted like he couldn't read. Maybe he couldn't. The word fiduciary seemed to hit him like a foreign language. I looked to the screen. Voting members, you've received the packet. The bylaws are included. The compliance breach attached. IP conflicts outlined in Exhibit C. No one spoke. I let the silence hang. 7 minutes of quiet tension, broken only by the faint hum of the HVAC and Arthur's increasingly rapid breathing. He turned to his father's avatar on the screen, but the man was stone-faced. Not even a blink. Let's vote, I said. One by one, the avatars flashed. Yes. No one dared dissent. Arthur's fingers clenched the table edge. Motion carried, I said, and closed the laptop. He didn't move, didn't speak. Didn't even breathe for a few seconds. Then he stood, slow, stiff, like a man who just realized the car he was driving wasn't his and he'd crashed it into a courthouse. No one told him to sit back down, and no one looked at him as he walked out. Except me. I watched his back the entire way. Because when you reclaim your company, you don't look away from the moment your mistake leaves the room. You memorize it. I wasn't here to gloat. I was here to finish the job. He was waiting by the elevators like he'd been holding his breath since the vote. I didn't rush. I let the boardroom door close behind me, slow and final, before I turned the corner and saw him. Arthur, arms folded, jaw tight, fake calm barely holding together over full-blown panic. He had that stunned, simmering look men get when the rules they thought they were exempt from suddenly apply. You're kidding, right? He hissed. You're not even active. You haven't done anything in years. This is petty. I didn't answer. Just pulled out my phone, tapped into my secure drive, and opened a document that had been sitting in draft form since the day he first installed that idiotic Slack bot named Visionary. I read it aloud, slow and clear, like I was reciting scripture. Clause 12b. Founding stakeholders may appoint interim officers pending full board ratification. He blinked. I reached into my bag and handed him a manila folder, crisp, labeled, time-stamped. He didn't take it, so I held it where he had no choice but to see what was inside. Interim COO appointment documentation, signed and notarized, NDA for transition activities with a clause that would make his future options very, very limited. Badge deactivation timestamp. 10:43 a.m., synced with the building's security logs. I didn't need to explain what came next. You'll need to hand over your access, I said. My tone never wavered. Device returns, vault credentials, code-based clearances, all of it. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Not defiance, not argument, just silence stretching between us like a pulled wire about to snap. That's when he finally noticed them. Security. 2 men in navy polos with the Luxor insignia on their sleeves standing a few feet behind him. Neutral expressions, clipboard in hand. One already scrolling through a return checklist. They weren't here to drag him out. They were here to document the transfer. Are you seriously doing this? He muttered, eyes wide now. You're having me walked out? What does this prove? I finally met his gaze. It proves you never bothered to read the charter, or the cap table, or the systems. He glanced at the folder again, like maybe the paper would self-destruct and free him from this reality. It didn't. He turned back to the security team. I need to get my laptop. It's already been locked, I said, and imaged. Everything you touched is being reviewed by compliance as we speak. He looked stunned, but I wasn't done. I don't do pettiness, Arthur. I do protocol. You violated it repeatedly. This isn't a personal decision. It's a correction. For a moment, he looked like he might throw a punch. Not at me. He didn't have that kind of backbone, but at the air, the wall, the reality he didn't think he'd ever have to face. Then he finally took the folder. Didn't open it. Didn't say another word. He walked to the elevator with security at his side, badge already deactivated, systems already scrubbing his access. The doors closed behind him with a soft ding, and that was that. Arthur Roebuck had left the building. They buried it on page 9. Luxor Systems filed the quarterly report like it was any other. Neutral fonts, sanitized summaries, shareholder updates, bullet points polished by lawyers and marketing teams. But there it was, tucked inside a quiet paragraph in the middle of the governance section. COO transition effective March 3rd. Previous role terminated due to governance breach. Interim officer appointed per foundational clause 12b, pending ratification. No names, no emotion, no spotlight, just a cold fact in regulatory language slid between a patent update and a brief mention of new vendor contracts. But anyone who knew the game, anyone watching the structure of power behind the polished LinkedIn posts, saw the truth. And the whispers started. Texts, emails, a few phone calls that I let ring out just to let them sit in their own curiosity. My inbox pinged from 6 people I hadn't heard from in years. Former engineers, compliance analysts, even one of the board observers who never used to remember my name. Then came the forwarded screenshot. An old colleague, Nisha from Risk and Infra, sent me a cropped text thread between 2 investors. No names, of course, just the messages. Wait, didn't Arthur fire her? Apparently not. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Instead, I clicked open the filing, scrolled to the line again, took a photo of the screen with my phone, not for evidence, not for court, not for leverage, just for me. I dropped it into a folder on my drive. The folder was already labeled, had been for years. Erase the smirk. Because that was always the thing with Arthur, the way he weaponized that grin, like the whole world was just another pitch deck and he was the only one with a laser pointer. He thought silence meant surrender. He thought soft-spoken meant powerless. He thought legacy meant disposable. And now, his name didn't even make it into the paperwork that undid him. No headline, no obituary, just erasure by procedure. He didn't get fired. He got overwritten. The building moved on without him, and the system he thought he controlled, it logged him out, automatically, quietly, permanently. Arthur's office stayed empty for a week. No one said a word about it. The nameplate vanished quietly one morning, and the lights stayed off after that. It wasn't reassigned. No ceremony, no big shuffle, just forgotten. The way outdated plugins get deprecated without patch notes. I didn't take it. Didn't even step inside. My desk, the one in the corner of the east wing where the server hum was loud enough to drown out nonsense, was still exactly how I left it. A half-filled coffee mug, my stress cactus, somehow still alive, 3 flagged backlog tickets that had been ignored during Arthur's streamlining crusade. So I sat down and got to work. No welcome back banners, no town hall announcements, just code reviews, firewall health checks, and a 6-week backlog of misplaced admin roles that I cleaned up in under 4 hours. Systems weren't broken, just bent by people who thought they were smarter than protocol. The audit log showed me everything I needed to know. Arthur had left a mess. Pushed half-tested tools into production, rerouted security workflows through his consulting buddies, and nearly triggered an industry-wide compliance violation by overriding a certificate renewal protocol I built myself in 2013. I reversed it all in silence. No finger pointing. Just quiet restoration. The CTO passed me by the server room mid-afternoon. He paused, nodded, then said, "Glad you're still here." I nodded back. That was enough. No lectures, no power trips, just an acknowledgement from someone who knew the infrastructure didn't hold because of board meetings. It held because someone stayed up at 2 a.m. every third Thursday testing patches before they went live. People started using my real name again. Not legacy director, not holdover from the old guard, just me. HR resent the termination rescind paperwork, with a formal apology buried in the metadata. I signed it and sent it back. No edits. They offered to update my title. I declined. Titles don't run systems. Documentation does, and the documentation was intact. Every line, every clause, every vote. Arthur didn't just get fired. He got documented into irrelevance. And I got back to work.